Well, hi you guys. I have something really fun for you today. I'm going to show you how to take just a plain Jane hooded or crew neck sweatshirt that has nothing on it, and I'm going to show you how to do this. Isn't that fun? So I quilted the sleeves, I quilted the pocket, and I embroidered the front here. But even if you just want to do quilted sleeves or a quilted pocket, I'm going to take you through exactly how I made it. Some things that I just want to mention before I show you how to do the sleeves and the pocket is I didn't cut anything off. I took a seam ripper to the inside seams and I seam ripped everything apart. So just grab a good TV show and your seam ripper and just go in and just start going at the seam. Now, because it's probably sewn with an overlock or a serger type of machine, it's going to have that type of stitching all the way around it. So it takes a little bit of time, but once you get that going, it's actually really easy. So in the video, I start by showing you how I laid everything out. I didn't show you how I took it all apart, but I just used a seam ripper. I took off the cuffs, I took off the sleeve at this entire part around the arm, and then I opened it up down this seam here. And then with the kangaroo pocket, I took this off, so the stitching is on the sides and across the top. Bottom is in the waistband here, the stretchy little part. So you do just need to take apart that seam. Now, let me see. You do not need a serger to put this back together. Now, I have one, but you can see on the bottom, I just did a straight stitch along that edge and I just trimmed off any excess here, but there shouldn't be much excess because you're putting it all right back together exactly how it was sewn. So keep that in mind. So I just did a straight stitch along the bottom, and then I did serge the arms because I didn't want them to be itchy. Now, keep in mind, I will sometimes just use what I have, and I only had black serger thread. Well, you can't see it because I pre-stitched everything with a sewing machine, so you can't see the seams, but I did go back in then and serge everything just so I didn't have that itchy line. Now, if you don't have a serger, you could just use a zigzag stitch along the edge to kind of capture the edge of the fabric, and you could trim it down a little bit if you need to. So those are just some tips that I wanted to give you before we get started, and then I'm going to have more tips as we go along throughout the entire process.
So I started using 2-inch squares for my fabric. I just took some fat quarter bundles and trimmed them down to this size. Then once I was done seam ripping the sleeve and I could lay it nice and flat, I opened it up, put it on my counter, and then I started just laying out the squares how I thought I would like to see them on the sweatshirt. Now, this is meant to look like patchwork. I didn't worry about matching up the seams or anything like that. I wanted it to just kind of be a quilted, fun, scrappy look on the sweatshirt. So I just started by making rows, and then I would make sure that each row covered the entire portion of the shirt. I wanted them to both overhang that edge of the shirt. And then I would sew those two pieces together. And then I would take the time and I was ironing each row as I went. So I would iron the seams nice and flat so it laid well when I was all done. So just give them a quick little press. Just open it up, give a little press with your iron, and then bring it back over to the shirt. And then we're going to lay it down. And again, we're going to make sure all the shirt is covered up, and then we're going to lay the next row on to this portion that we started sewing. And I like to pin just so nothing is shifting and moving. The sides aren't matching up. The biggest thing that I was watching for here is to make sure that how I was sewing this together was covering up all the visible portion of the shirt, because you don't want any of the sweatshirt visible. So I just went back and forth between the sweatshirt sleeve and my machine, and I would just keep building the rows slowly as I went. I love when I get done with each row, I just open it up, see how it's looking, and I can already see it coming together. So I just kept doing this and repeating this process until I got to the other end of the sleeve and the entire sleeve was covered. Now there is going to be overhang all the way around. You definitely want to make sure that you have that overhang, because next up we're going to do some quilting, and we're going to quilt this big patchwork piece that we made to the sleeve, and I like to quilt it before we do any trimming. So just be sure that each of your rows are long enough to go from one side over to the other, and that you have made enough rows. I ended up having to make more rows than I originally thought because I didn't account for that seam allowance. You know, you're losing that 1/4 inch all at every seam. So actually a 1/2 inch, you know what I mean? So make sure you're calculating that. I just kept taking my squares and using them as like little building blocks. And I just kept covering up the portion of the sweatshirt until I made enough rows and used enough squares to cover up everything. Okay, so now we are done and I've laid the squares all out, and then I'm going to put the sweatshirt sleeve on top. And I do have mine going at a diagonal because I thought it would be fun. And I'm using a little bit of spray adhesive here, and I did protect the edge of my surface. I've got this little cardboard thing. It's actually a cereal box that I use. I just needed something to protect my surface with. So I lay it out and I spray from the middle towards the outside, and then I press all the edges down, and right here I could see where it was curling up. This sweatshirt material does have a tendency to curl because of the type of material that it is, so don't worry about that. Just use your basting adhesive and spray down all of your edges to make sure it's going to stay nice and flat and it's not going to roll under your needle when you're doing your quilting. See, old cereal box works great. Now, you can quilt this any way you want. Because this is a kind of a scrappy looking patchwork and there's a lot going on with the fabric that I chose with the stripes and the dots and all the prints, I wanted to do just simple straight lines. Basically here, you just want to make sure it's attached and it's going to stay stuck to your sleeve and stay in place where it should all be. So I'm just going to use simple straight line quilting. First, I'm going to go down, I'm going to follow along with the row, and I'm just stitching down the center of each row. And then I'm going to go the other direction to kind of make a crisscross diagonal pattern here. I am going to speed this up because this would get really tedious if you just watched me quilt the entire thing, because I'm just sewing simple straight lines over and over and over again. So you get the point. Once you're done and you're happy with your quilting, lay this down on a cutting mat. You can see my quilt design kind of through the sweatshirt here. Now we're going to carefully trim. You don't want to cut off any of the sweatshirt itself because you'll alter the size of it if you do that. So make sure you're just trimming along the edges. You want to cut off the excess fabric, but you don't want to cut into the sweatshirt itself. And I was going to use a straight edge, and then I decided with the curves and the corners on here, I would just follow along, cutting slowly just to cut off that excess fabric. Once you've trimmed off the edges, it's time to start putting it back together. So first I'm going to fold it in half and I'm going to match up everything. It should all match just fine as long as you didn't cut into the shirt. And then you can either pin or clip here. And first we're going to just sew. I like to sew with the sewing machine first, and then I'll go back through and use my serger. And like I mentioned, if you don't have a serger, just do a zigzag stitch along that edge. That will finish it off just fine. You don't have to have a serger to do this. But first I'm just doing a simple straight stitch down the length of the sleeve. Make sure your right sides are together, because at this point we're just putting it back together and we're just using the existing pieces as our pattern. Now I was a little excited to put these sleeves back together because I couldn't wait to see what it actually looked like around the sleeve. Like I had a visual in my mind, but I wanted to see right away, did it turn out the way I was envisioning? And it totally did. I didn't want these straight. I wanted them on an angle like they are. So I had to try it on. And while I was busy sewing, the machine was stitching out this adorable design from OESD, and I just love how it looks. All right, let's talk about this pocket. Now you can see there's weird angles and curves and stuff. Press it open and just follow that line, just like you did for the sleeves. You want to lay out your blocks, make your rows, make sure the entire portion is covered up. And then we're going to do this the exact same way that we did the sleeves, making sure we can't see any of the blue sweatshirt below. Once you're happy with your layout, and yes, I'm even covering up those tiny little corners. They may be visible, they may be not. I didn't want to take a chance. So then I start sewing all the rows, pressing my seams down so that they lay nice and flat. You want this to be flat, especially because you're going to put it on a sweatshirt. So I just kept building this the same way I did the sleeves, sewing one row to the next, making sure the entire portion of the pocket was covered until I sewed all of the pieces together and I could cover up the pocket just like we did the sleeve. And then we're going to do the same process with the quilting. Once you have all your pieces sewn, everything is covered up, then you're going to lay it out, press it again if you need to, and use some temporary basting adhesive, and then you're going to want to quilt it. and then trim off all of that excess. And again, it's really important that you don't cut off any of the original sweatshirt. Those pieces are all there for a reason, and it's your pattern to follow when you put this back together. Now, with the kangaroo pocket, the one thing I made a note of is how was it put together, because you want to put it back together that same way. So the first thing was the curves. So once I get all of this trimmed, then I'm going to bring this back over to the ironing board, and we are going to press down those curves because they're going to be the most finicky, but it does lay down really nice. And I just followed the exact same lines from where I took it all apart, but I pressed the curves just so that they would stay down nicely. And then the rest of it, I was able to just fold over with my hands and sew it in place without having to press. But you can press it all the way around if you want. But I did the curves first, and then I stitched them in place. And then I did the sides and then the top. Keep in mind here too, I did fold like the sides down, and I did a top stitch, knowing that I would have another top stitching line from where I attached it to the sweatshirt. So my lines were intentionally moved over slightly so that I could do 2 rows of stitching. One row was to hold everything in place, and then that second row is going to be when I reattach this to the sweatshirt. Now, we don't reattach where the curves are. That's where you want your hands to be able to go. So we're going to have those double lines along the little side parts and the top, but not in the curves and not in the bottom. So I'm going to bring this back over to the sweatshirt, and I'm just going to pin it in place. I matched up the bottom edge already. And the nice thing is, because I took it apart, I knew exactly where to lay this down. You can still see the stitch line. So I could see exactly where the original stitching was, and I was careful to line everything up, pin it all into place so it lined up exactly where the existing pocket was. And then I just pinned it all into place. Now, when you get to the bottom, you want to make sure that you first pin it along to the bottom of the sweatshirt and keep the rest of that waistband just out of your way. And you can see here, I did not undo the entire waistband. I only did it just a little bit beyond each side of the pocket so I could get the pocket free. There's no need to take the entire thing off. And then here, just really take your time and pin it well all the way across the bottom so that you don't have any weird puckering or anything like that.
Isn't this just so much fun? And I mean, it was literally just a plain sweatshirt that had nothing on it, and then I just took it apart with my seam ripper and added all of these elements and put it back together. It was actually a really fun project. It was easier than I thought it would be. One tip I want to give you is I would definitely size up in the sweatshirt because you take away the stretch that the sleeves have. So this, I did a medium. Honestly, I think I could have even done it with a large instead. So make sure you size up at least one size. Try on the sweatshirt before you start taking it apart, but just remember you're gonna lose any stretch you have in the arm because you're putting a woven over the knit, which is going to then prevent it from moving. But I have washed this, so the fabric, I mean, it crinkled a tiny, tiny bit, like I think just enough. This is Tula Pink fabric, in case you are wondering. This is also a Tula Pink design from OESD. You can download this design directly from OESD's website, and I will put all the links down below in the description. Now, be sure you hit that subscribe button because we have a lot of fun videos coming for you later this month, and actually we're trying to do a video every single week, and I don't want you to miss a thing.